you. Thanks, everyone, for being here and listening so intently. I think that, like Luisa, I've written a lot about this subject because I'm so deeply worried about how the past gets distorted by memory. And these overt erasures aren't the only danger that we face. There's also just the natural human loss of memory. And in fact, memory studies are showing that the more we deliberately try to recall the past, the more we rewrite it. We can't even help it. It's something organic that takes place in our own brains. And that seems counterintuitive. Many of us think that the more I recite a story, the more I specifically choose to remember, the more I'm solidifying that. But in fact, it's the opposite. And so what we're all forced to accept then is a kind of surrender to the necessary transformation of the past. And I'm thinking about Jung, as you referenced Jung, and I think it was Jung who said, a dream is a memory of the future. And he, of course, was very interested in the collective memories that we hold. And my book that Magda graciously mentioned, Survivor Cafe, I refer to the labyrinth of memory, and this notion that memory is anything but linear, and that also as writers, we then have to choose how faithful can we be to memories that are not literally our own. So as the daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors, I've lived all of my life with a sense that I'm responsible not only for my own memory, but the memories of my parents who survived and the existence of the people who didn't survive. So it's kind of an infinite task of collective memory. And so it's very daunting and easily defeating in that sense of I'm incapable of holding that much memory myself. But at the same time believing that I'm part of a wider human responsibility to the past. And that in Japan, for example, there's a role that has now been established called Denshosha. Am I pronouncing that right? Denshosha? And this is a person who is the designated transmitter of memory. And it's someone who may not even be related to the survivors, in this case of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, who are passing away in the same way that Holocaust survivors are disappearing. And the Denshosha are taking it upon themselves to memorize the story of the Hibakusha, who are the bomb-affected persons, they call themselves. And so I feel like what happens for all of us, writers and everyone else, is that we must also choose to be Denshosha. We have to accept and choose the role of the memory keeper imperfectly, to admit that it's always going to be an imperfect memorialization. And the other image I have for this is thinking about the robots that Magda mentioned. In Holocaust museums right now, they are building holograms of Holocaust survivors who are being interviewed for hours with testimony that can then be somehow broken down into parts. And so students who in the future will never be able to meet a Holocaust survivor in person, with a tattoo, with the embodiment of what they lived through, but they will now face a holographic representation of that person and ask questions. I've had an encounter with one of these holograms, and my question to this woman, this hologram of a survivor, was, is it painful for you to keep telling this story over and over again? Because that's another question about memory. Does it wound us to remember? Does it heal us to remember? everything in between. So she sort of stirred into life, this 3D representation, and she answered my question as if she had thought about it and was now responding to me, but really it was collected from this recording she had made. It was eerie and somehow really poignant also. And so I could go on and on about this question because I've been thinking about it for years. But this idea that, ancient people with the oral tradition, with storytelling as their form of memory keeping, also have to wrestle with this way that it's reinterpreted by each generation. And the generation, as Luisa was mentioning, the generation who inherit perpetrator stories are even more heavily tasked with a memory of what they come from. In a way, you can say it's easier to be a descendant of a victim than a descendant of a perpetrator. But in truth and reconciliation practices, like in South Africa and Argentina, these places where they're trying to allow for this dialogue in real time between the holders of the past on all the sides of the genocide or the atrocity. So I'll stop there, but really I am so grateful for the chance to speak on this subject. It's so important. Thank you.